Hello everybody, and welcome to the third leg of the Biennial Dangerous Goods Roadshow. Web show, I should say. Would have been a roadshow, but we're obviously online. My name's Richard Shreve from Label Line International. So on behalf of our Managing Director, Keith King, and the whole of the Label Line team, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a very interesting day. So, excuse me, my bit of paper fell on the floor. Firstly, I'd like to thank all our contributors and sponsors for the event. Without, of course, it wouldn't have happened. And just a couple of housekeeping things before we kick off. The GoToWebinar control panel on your screen there has got a little orange box with a white arrow that can minimize or maximize the control panel. And during the presentations, if you've got any questions, please fill them in the question box at the bottom. If they're for the presenters, we will ask the presenters at the end of their presentation. And if they're of a technical nature, then my colleague, Jocelyn Dropper here, will do her level best to make sure that the event goes as smoothly as possible for you. So I think just to say that this event is being recorded, and the recording will be available after the event from our website. So the previous two are already available. If you go to our event page on the website, you can click on and go through to see the recordings. So I'll now introduce our first speaker, who is Herman Tiering. He's the Managing Director of DG Office BV based in Holland. He's going to talk about digitisation and the digitalisation in the future of dangerous goods data transfer by all modes of transport. Herman. You okay there? Microphone, Herman, is your microphone on? You're muted. Your mic, top of the screen. Your microphone is off.
Now it's better. I got muted by yourself. Screen is there. All right, thank you very much, Richard. Welcome all to the first presentation. My name is Herman Tiering, Managing Director of DG Office. As I said, I'm going to talk about digitalization of DG shipments. Let me see. Make sure that that one is working. Here we are. A little bit about what we do and who we are. We are DG Office. 26 years in business when we're talking about development and working with DG software. As you see on the screen, we are currently serving around 1,700 companies. We have roughly 19,000 users registered on the systems. Each day we have about 1,200 users logged in, and we do a lot of web service requests. We have our own development. We do our own data maintenance. We have our own experts. We are connected internationally with a lot of people, including Label Line. And that's basically where we run our business for the last years. One of the things we are completely developing is digitization. And what we do there, again, a short history of where we are with digitalization of DG shipments. It's for sure existing for many years, mostly intercompany. We have a lot of companies that work internally. We all know the integrators there, where you book a shipment online in their system and you can follow everything through. That's all digitizing shipments, and if it's DG or non-DG, that's basically the whole standards. What we saw during all these years is a lot of development. We started with telex, EDI formats, basic exchange of information. And then from the mid 2000, we saw an international approach to that one. It became clear that we needed to do something in digitization. Everybody saw the interest and understood the needs why. And internationally, IATA launched their e-freight manual, the handbook, in 2000. E-freight set up, and then in 2008 the first handbook was published. In 2009 we stepped in with the DG shipments, and that was the development and the testing of the SDDG, and that was specifically for dangerous goods transport by air. There was a multimodal approach, but it's more or less let loose, and it's now more air related from an IATA point of view. We did some trials in 2010 and 2011. And then it dropped a little bit down. It stayed on the shelf, and then it was picked up again in 2018 with a couple of airlines. Lufthansa running up front there together with Air France and Swiss. And from there, that's basically where we are right now when we're talking from our perspective and the exchange of information. Then we're looking at the current initiatives. And if we're looking at Europe, then we are part of the DGTINA organization, the Dangerous Goods Transport Information Network Association. And on top of that, we have on European level, funded by the EU, the DTLF, the Digital Transport and Logistics Forum, where a lot of people are working together in developing standards and coming up with initiatives and how we can get to the next step of digitization. In the US and in Canada, we have a regulatory sandbox project at the moment. That's a test environment which is in place and which is running at this moment. It's scheduled to end in 2022. And if we're looking at Canada, we have 4 participants, but it's more railway oriented. And I said internationally, IATA is having their XSG work group, where we're talking about the dangerous goods mode for air. Europe is more focusing on the multimodal approach. The whole the DTLF is focusing on road, because a lot of shipments in Europe are going by road or rail. And of course, we're also picking up on the inland waterways. Well, if we're talking about digitization, you need to follow a couple of steps. And the development steps for the digitization of shipments is mainly that we need to come up with the development of standards. You need to come up with something that people understand. If you talk a different language to a system, then they don't understand. So the standards is vital. You need to agree about how we're going to do that, how the data is going to be organized, how we're going to exchange it. That's more the second step, exchange networks. How are you going to do this? Data security is for sure vital, because a lot of questions around, and doesn't matter if it's digitization of DG shipments, but also in business data, social media, you name it, everybody's currently talking about data security. And on top of that, we have a lot of regulations when we're talking about authorization of data, ownership of data, personal privacy. And in that step, we're also looking at the third development step, and that we need to include authorities, emergency responders, because it's all nice to exchange data between a shipper and a carrier, for instance, but the whole meaning of this part is that we're also going to use the data which we currently do in the paperwork also in the following up steps, and that means you need to include authorities. Emergency responders need to get access to that data as well to react in case of. At this moment, we have all kind of routines in where data should be stored on paper, where that paper should be, if it should be in the cabin, if something should be reported up front, yes or no, and we all need to take care of that one in the digitization as well. Well, if we're looking at standards, what is common practice right now is more or less XML messages. In the past, we had different standards, but they were more or less restricted in what you could put into it. XML is more dynamic. It has less restrictions, and you could do much more of it. And most of the systems that we currently have in place are able to manage and process XML messages. Some standards that we have are mode specific, and that's a shame, because normally what you would like to do is make things multimodal as possible, come up with one standard that you can use everywhere. Cargo XML, for instance, that we saw from IATA was intended multimodal. There are some multimodal things inside, but it was with the initiatives from 2018, it was drawn back more to air only. We made our own DGXML standard for the simple fact that when we started with it, there were no global standards. DGXML we try to make as multimodal as possible, so everything which is possible in the whole dangerous goods transport shipment area we try to put into one format. And DATEX2, it's a model which is used in Europe with the Digitina project, and I think it's also outside the boundaries of Europe. That's all related to traffic information. And in the DATEX, you will find all kind of data, roads specifications, traffic lights, speed, locations. And what we're doing in Europe at the moment is adding the dangerous goods chapter as well. That's a very extensive standard, but it's also a more or less a public standard. So that's also good. Then the next step is to talk about exchange networks. And you need to come up with ideas, protocols, security parameters, and how these systems can connect to each other. You need to exchange data. You need to make sure that it's secure. Just like you would send email, you have to address it to somebody or to a system, specifically one. You don't put it up in the open like a message board or something. No, you want to send this information only to the parties that need it. Or the other way, you could say, I only want to make my data available to parties that are allowed to see it. I don't want to have it up to public. That relates to security, where you could say, okay, who can create and edit or own my data? Who is the owner in the beginning? Who has access to it? And can it be controlled? And in what way? We see that with a lot of day-to-day business. As I said, we do it via email. A lot of people are using applications on their mobile devices. We see a lot of systems that open up for mobile use. That's all nice. But you need to come up with something that controls that. And that comes to basically the next step in line, the use of the data by other parties. As said, emergency responders and authorities, we need inspectors to be able to do that. Currently, they will ask for your paperwork and will validate if your cargo is complying with the rules, if your truck, for instance, is complying with the rules. And that's all based on the paper document. Emergency responders, they need to get hold of the information. It's either that it's a telephone number where they can call for more information, or it's a copy of the declaration which is there. And that's all a paper process that the moment you talk about digitization, you need to open it up in different ways so that they can still get to the information. And it gives more options, and we'll get there in a minute. Well, for the people involved in road transport and that follow the WP15 a little bit, this is the concepts that was presented, I think it was a couple of months ago, by WP15, and the guidelines for use of RD, ADR, and then 5402. And that's the concept about how to digitize the process of DG shipments. And the concept, as written down in that paperwork, I've included the link to that. And afterwards, the presentations will be available, so you can follow the links and get all the information from there. We have two parties in that concept, and we both call them trusted parties, and we have a trusted party 1 and a trusted party 2. The trusted party 1, the TP1s, are the public players, and the TP2 are the private players. And the public players, the public players are indeed authorities, emergency responders, and that level. And the private players are, in this particular concept, are the carriers. The shippers are not really involved in this one because we're talking about digitization of shipments during carriage. Carriers, as said, are connected to a TP2, so a trusted party 2. And what we'll do now is I'll show you the concept a bit more, go through how the intention was to work that out, and then you see it in a minute in how that else can be done. Trusted party 1, public players, national authorities, they choose a TP1. And the whole concept is set up is that it's a national process with global players. So a national authority, in this case, connects, selects, or starts their own TP1 system, trusted party 1. They control who has the authorization on the TP1 on their behalf. So the national authority of, for instance, the UK would assign their inspectors, emergency responders that are under their control, and they authorize the use of these data to the system. And all the TP1s, so all the national authority levels are connected. So Germany, the UK, the Netherlands, for instance, they would all have their own system, but these are talking to each other. And we have a trusted party 2, and they are for the private players. Each trusted party 2 is connected to a single national authority system, and a carrier selects one of these TP2 providers to connect to. And as we read down, only the selected TP1 can request data from the TP2. It's highly technical, so what I try to do is make a picture of it, and we'll get to this picture a couple of times. I'll try to make it as clear as possible, but forgive me if it's a bit technical, but it gives you an idea of how things are set up. So we have a schema. On the left side, you will see the private actors, the economic operators, as we call them, the consigner, freight forwarder, loader, packer, filler, consignee, and they're all connected to the carrier. A carrier on the blue line in the middle, you will see is connected to a content manager, being the TP2, and there's a connection between a TP2 and a TP1. A TP1 connects to the right, where we have the public bodies, and they will see that an authority will not have direct access to a carrier information. They need to request it, and only authorized people on the right can request data from the content manager. So only an inspector who's authorized by his national authority can ask the system for the information of what is happening. Well, then we have on the bottom line, we have some optional things. We can have automatic triggers in case of accidents or incidents, which will trigger an alarm and will inform an emergency responder, for instance. They are all optional, which can be part of this whole setup. Let's look at the intention of how it should work. As said, we talk about a carrier. A carrier needs to get the information from his shipments from the shippers. And how he does that is basically up to them. He can collect the paperwork and enter all that information into a system and make it available from there, or he can use the systems and work together in that one. So a carrier just has to prepare his shipments as he will do at this moment. But instead of paper, he uploads the data into the selected TP2 system. On that point, we have some validations running that indeed all the information that must be there is there. For instance, a license plate. The whole intention is to set it up around a vehicle, and that vehicle has a unique identifier, which is most probably the license plate on that truck or a container number. One of these things you can specify. And the moment that the transport starts moving, the carrier initiates that he at that moment starts his transport. So he is the one who says, all right, now my truck leaves my premises and now it becomes part of the public domain, so it goes on the road. And to indicate for any emergency responder or inspector, the vehicle is marked to indicate that this is an electronic dangerous goods transport. So there's no paper on board, it's all digital. And for that we see at this moment a proposal which is again a diamond shaped marking with a big letter E inside, which stands for electronic. And that would then be the mark next to all the normal required markings on the truck and the placards. That we have this one, which indicates that there's no paper on board, but everything is digital. And again, it's not carved in stone. It's a proposal, but most probably you will find something like this. We also saw a previous one that had more like a Wi-Fi symbol with an E, and this will probably evolve a little bit further, but that's what it is at this moment. The TP2 server, so the content holder, has the data set of the shipment. So the carrier uploads the data in there, it's available, shipment becomes marked as active, and is deactivated again when the transport is stopped. So it will only be available for request during the transport. And the carrier is the only one who decides if the transport has stopped or started. The carrier is also the owner of the data. And as I said, he's the only one who triggers if something is available, yes or no. Back to the picture. So the carrier started, and we now have the data available on the TP2 content manager in the middle. So the data is there during the transport. Continues, truck starts driving, and then we see, okay, what's the next phase? As long as nothing is going on, the truck will stop at his destination, and the carrier will mark the shipment as stopped, and the data will no longer be available in TP2. Now we see what happens if, for instance, an emergency or an inspection is happening during the transport. This happens, and what happens at the moment? The emergency responder, we afterwards will find out what emergency response services are in Europe and the rest of the world. But in that case, yeah, the emergency responder needs to do something. So he acts to the scene or gets the license plate of the vehicle in question. What he does is he goes to his TP1 system. He is authorized by his national authority. He has access to that system. And we'll type in the license plate number of the truck involved. Request for info is sent, and the first thing that the TP2 server will do first, is the user authorized? Yes, he is. And then he will start questioning his own connected TP2 system. Do I have this data in my system? Do you have this available for me? Yes or no? If it is, it will respond. If it's not, then he has a problem. That's very simple. So an active shipment is found. The TP2 says, okay, I have your data. Here's your data. The TP2 will translate that into readable form again. And that's up to the systems and how to do that. You can develop different apps, or you can even present it back into a PDF copy in how the actual paperwork would look like. You could put it on screen. You can basically use that data to inform everybody in his own way. I can imagine that an inspector would like to see a different layout of the screen than, for instance, an emergency responder. They have different interest in the data behind it. The beauty from these systems is you don't need to search up another system. You can use the data in there and basically present the data that you want to see for yourself. That's the case when your connected server has the data. If it's not, then the TP1 will ask his other connected system. So he will ask, if it's not in the UK, where is it then? If the shipment originated in Germany, goes to the Netherlands, and then ends up in the UK, then most probably the German TP1 has that data. So the TP1s will start connecting to each other and ask each other out. So, okay, do you have this data? Do you have this data? Up to somebody responds, yes, I have the data over here. Here it is. And as said, when there is no data involved, then the carrier has an issue because he originated a transport electronically. And most probably that shipment is either not marked as being active, or they did not upload the data at all. And to prevent that everything drops down on the carrier, there are a lot of fail-safes in the system. So there will be reports if, for instance, one of the servers in the system is out. That will all be proactive, but at least it's notified that there is data, but the server who has it is not available at the moment. Then of course you have the callback options, and then we basically fall back a little bit. There's where some work needs to be done in how to do that. But yeah, on the other hand, things happen. It's all technical. Paperwork can get lost, but also systems can go down. But as I said, we have triggers, we have location loggers, etc., so that we can at least try to follow as much as possible and respond on time. After the transport, the carrier again reports that the transport had ended. The TP2 says it's not active anymore, so data will not be found. So afterwards, nobody can start entering license plate of trucks that he saw a day before and see if we can still get some data out of it. The moment that the transport is marked as stopped, then the data is no longer available. And a TP2 will no longer respond to a request because the data is not active anymore. The truck has stopped. Again, it's up to the carrier. If he stops the shipment and still does a lag afterwards, then he has an economical problem. In the data set, there's nothing else in that data set as currently is on the paper. So the dangerous goods declaration or the digital version of the shipment should be equal. There is optional location data available of the vehicle. So you could, for instance, put in a track and trace device, which uploads the location, the active location as well. But that's an optional thing. And there's an optional thing like route information. Routing information you could, for instance, use in different ways. One of the things that an event organizer, or at least local authorities, would like to avoid is that the moment that you have a big demonstration going on, that you don't get a truckload full of chemicals or flammable liquids in the neighborhood. So you could proactively make route blockings to vehicles that are running around in that area. That's all future, but on the other hand, it's you could connect these two things to navigation systems, where you could very specifically instruct any carrier that has specific substances on board to follow a different routing. But that's all future things that are possible when you're talking about digitization. It's not that we want to get to a system where everybody can just monitor everything. We had a couple of years ago, we had the EU that the brilliant idea is to follow actively and open all explosives and radioactive shipments, so that they had a dashboard that they could see where all these trucks were at the given time. Yeah, that's nice from a regulatory point of view, but it's also very attractive information for other people that have other plans with these kind of shipments. So that's something you don't want. Back to the picture. A recap of the schema. Again, on the left, the carriers and everyone connected to that. On the right, the public bodies, and in the middle, the exchange of data, in where we really make a definition or a segregation between the access and the content, and just to make sure that we have all these fail-safes, security, etc. in place. And for sure, this will need to be worked out. But at least it's a good approach, which is currently driven by 4 European countries that are really actively involved in this one. Germany running up front together with France, Italy, and also Austria. The status of this one is that we have these countries up and running on a TP1. We have several TP2 servers being in the process. We just finalized the definition of the data that we need to send out. Testing will start roughly in Q4, so October, November. We expect to do some real testing next to the normal paper, but then also do the digital process. And as said, Germany, Austria, Italy, and France are involved at this stage. The good thing is that this whole thing is in line with what is currently in the USA and the Canada Sandbox. They would like to follow the same approach. And if it's exactly the same, I don't dare to say, but at least the way of handling data and the way to get access to data is following the same concept. And the other benefit is that the setup fits in the EFTI proposal, and that's the next stage. The European Union adopted Regulation 2020-1056 on July 15th this year. The EFTI regulation, which stands for Electronic Freight Transport Information, applicable to road, rail, inland waterway transport in the EU. And the intention is that after 2025, as written there, paper can still be used, but electronic data exchange must be accepted by all states. And that's quite a drastic change, because it means that the moment that industry decides that from that moment on they will drop paperwork but will do everything digital, every state within the EU will need to accept it. And that's quite an approach. There's a whole framework, there's a whole also a timeline in that EFTI regulation in when what needs to be done. But indeed, the current agenda is that in 2025 everything should be ready, and there's no way around it anymore. And not only for the dangerous goods, but basically for everything around transport. So we already have initiatives going on for the CMR, which is electronic, and there's much more around that. Not only the DG, but the DG will be part of that one. So where we are involved in this whole process, we are actively involved in the development of standards. That's what we said already. We're doing that for at least 12 years. We have developed our own DGXML standard, where everything we do just follows that one. We have an operational e-freight module. We do that together with Lufthansa already in a live connection, where users can send their full shipments electronically. Either we generate the paperwork where it's required by national laws, or else we just do it digitally, but we do both. We are a member of the Dangerous Goods Transport Information Network. We are setting up a TP2 provider as well, so that means that all our customers will have the opportunity to log into that system as well. We, at this moment, we have an optional way to set up a TP1 as well, so that we can connect to authorities and they could probably pick one. Not all countries are ready to set up their own or don't want to use other ones, their own, but will connect to public available systems. And we are actively participating in several digitization processes with our partners. That's basically my presentation so far. So I leave it up to Richard again for questions and answers, if there are.
And yes, there are, Herman. Thank you very much for that. So the first question I have is from Janet Kolodzini-Cohen from US. Why was the shipper not involved in the process? I think this goes back to the beginning of your presentation, yep. Because the shipper could upload the information and then the liability for the data would rest with them as it should be.
Yeah, indeed, and that's what we said. I understand from the concept, because as an inspector or, for instance, the emergency responder, you would not deal with the shipper unless he's also the transporter. But in many cases, it's just a carrier who at that moment is involved. So the concept was set up that the carrier decides to go electronic, and at that moment the carrier needs to convince his shippers to do that electronically as well. That link is where I think industry comes in, where people like us come in, where we just make that available for everybody, so a shipper can connect to his carrier, do everything electronically, and the carrier can pick it up from there. But from the concept way, especially if we look in how it's set up in the EU, that part is clear, because else you would involve everybody in that whole system and make them part of that system, and it's very hard to control. At this moment, a shipper cannot decide when that truck from that carrier leaves, so he can only exchange it with the carrier, and then the carrier is the next follow-up in line. So yeah, I understand the question, but I think that particular question is something up to the industry, like the providers of the systems, to make that happen for the carriers.
Okay, and with that 2025 deadline, you anticipate that there will be an impetus across industry to make sure that this is going to happen anyway, and then everything will be in alignment.
I think the 2025 for the European is just a very nice one, because it basically puts a pressure on the states to make sure that they're ready, because from that moment on they need to be able to handle it. But it also is a more like a trigger for the industry, because they need to respond. Do you want to use it or not? It's not a must for the industry. You can still use paper, but if you use electronics, then the states need to adopt it. So again, there, I think from a market or commercial point of view, yeah, there's where the change will be. There's where all the parties involved in the industry have the chance to extend their services, and they could offer everything electronically, or they can continue with paper. But there's where the advantages will come. So I think especially from the regulator's point of view, this is the interesting part. We'll just make sure that the states are ready, and then it's up to the industry if they want to use it.
Okay, this question from David Bond. The E indicator is quite interesting, because I still don't know whether this is a 100mm label or a 250mm placard. And David's question was, could it be indicated actually on the orange plate rather than duplicating markings on vehicles? Appreciate it might not be quite so easy to do it on a tanker where you've got all the Kevlar and UN numbers already on there, but is this something that is being looked at? How is it going to be displayed?
I don't know. This is something that at the moment is on the table at WP15, where they, at least at this moment, have made it clear that there needs to be some kind of indicator on the vehicle, on a container, that this shipment or this transport is carried under an electronic way. How and what is not clear. They just put in they said this is the second logo, the second mark that we saw. The first one we saw was that little Wi-Fi symbol with an E. Now it's changed again to a diamond-shaped orange one with E. I would say, yeah, why not? Would it be an orange plate with an E instead of with a UN number at that stage? Because yeah, I don't know. It's something that is I think at this moment still on the table at WP15 and up to the states to declare and what they would like to see. But I would imagine that it makes sense to use one of the existing things. So either as the orange plates on the vehicle, instead of just an additional mark or placard on the truck or on the container.
Yeah. Okay, and Michaela has asked, what are the countries that are not ready for electronic paperwork, if that makes sense? Yeah, electronic data transfer, I suppose you say.
Well, we try to come up with, or at least try to investigate which of the countries that are not having something. The funny thing is that if you look at DTLF, I think they're under the umbrella of DTLF, and that's just Europe that we have investigated. I think there are 4 or 5 projects running at this moment where dangerous goods is somewhat connected. This is the from the WP15, so really from the ADR point of view, these are the 4. We are in Holland, and we've asked the Dutch government, so where are we? And they say, yeah, we're just investigating. That's the answer that you get of most of these countries. We also asked the UK via you guys, how far are we? And everybody wants something, but I think they're all waiting for something touchable or proven what to do. And the funny thing is, with that EFTI, they now need to act. So I think there's also for us as industry, there's now something that we can use to also talk with these governments. Guys, you need to act. So either you start from scratch, or you just hook up with projects that are running, not from us, but from an EU perspective, one of the projects that is running via the States. But there's no clear, the only one that we know are willing is indeed these 4 that we have. And then on top there are some few local or even in a bigger state with industry participations that we are looking at what is possible. The ECMR, for instance, is much further ahead already, because that's running, I think, in 5 or 6 states already where people would accept the ECMR.
Okay, and that's that I suppose answers Marion Belange's question, which is any idea of Brexit impact on EFTI?
Sorry.
Any idea of Brexit impact on this, the EFTI?
No, not really. to be honest, we tried to follow up a little bit, and we were busy with that the Digitina part, and then EFTI came on the shelf. And basically, what we're doing right now is connecting these 2 initiatives. And the way it looks right now, with it's just wishful thinking maybe. We're trying to convince not to invent something new again under EFTI. Because what we have at this moment, what I just presented, fits into that project. So maybe we need some fine tuning, and we already did some cooperation there to use basically that model and then roll it out under the EFTI umbrella as well. So yeah, on practice, I think we're looking at testing this year, and then in the States that will adopt the early adopters. Hopefully we can start somewhere next year with practice. And then we're looking at the individual state to be ready. They have up to 2025. So everyone who we can convince to do it earlier and step in and have a system ready, then that might work.
Okay. I've got one from one of our speakers who's going to be on later, Peter Mackay. Thanking him for the presentation. He understands that ECLIC, eClick, is also looking at ECMR. Are you following what they're doing? And is there a danger that there'll be any duplication of effort if there's non-compatibility between the systems?
Yeah, what they're trying to do with EFTI is set up the framework, because at this moment, what happens on that level is they will agree about standards. So what they're trying to do within at least the EFTI within the European Union is to get to one communication protocol and one way of exchanging information. So that would, at least at that level, would avoid duplication. But I agree, because we saw it in other parts as well, and that basically is the reason why we came up with our own. There is no global standard or national standard, maybe a national one, but even within the different modes of transport, you will see differences already, because everybody would think they're special. In the end, for us, from a dangerous goods perspective, there's nothing special, because the dangerous goods information basically is the same all over. You have some differentiations left and right, but you should not develop your own little standard, so it will not match with your connecting modes of transport. Most of the ways of transport, except for road, are multimodal anyway. So yeah, there is a chance that there will be some overlap left and right, but in the end, at least within the EFTI, everybody would need to comply with that new to develop standard, which is set for, I think, 22, where they're aiming for to have developed and defined that standard.
Okay. A couple of questions from Julian Cox. One is actually not so much a question, more of a statement, saying that marking the orange plates would not necessarily be good for containers, presumably because You know, you're going to have to keep changing when the container changes. But then I guess that's a concern with other things as well. But he also says if there's no mobile signal or the system goes down, how will the emergency services be able to access the information, and how will the driver access the details of the load appears in an area that mobile phones are not allowed due to an explosive atmosphere?
Yeah, that's one of the points that we have to see and how to get that answered. One of the things could be that, and that basically ADR allows that already. You don't need to have a piece of paper as long as you have a reproduction of that paperwork on a mobile device. So that could be a PDF download when you enter one of these areas, that you already take that information to your device, so you have a copy of that available, where you don't need mobile connection, but you have a PDF copy of that one. You could think of the same in a data set. So the moment that you're renting these kind of locations, that you already have downloaded it in one way or form, what we currently allow as well. In my view, the driver on itself would not have the issue, because it's more or less inspectors or emergency responders who would need to get that information up front. And that could already be the moment that you get a report or you get an emergency call, that even before you are on site, you already have the license plate and you can start retrieving that information. But indeed, that's one of the bottlenecks that we have in the system. But likewise now, if paperwork is not accessible, you also need something. So I think it will not replace the telephone number that is available in case of, that you still are able to connect to somebody who knows more about this transport and can get you that information, if it's not on paper or digital, but that you get it via the current means. I think that the whole fail-safe thing needs to be worked out completely, but I don't think that will disappear.
Okay.
Not sure if that answers the question, but
yeah, I guess that, as you say, there's going to be quite a lot of hurdles going through all this. I think one of the questions here is from David Cox at MSC in New York. Can you speak a bit more about the network security and redundancies of the TP1 and TP2? What are the future development plans? Is this, I guess this is looking at this from a broader perspective.
Yeah, the way we're looking at this now, but that's more the technical approach. You don't want to have information. We try to compare it with a current piece of paper, because at this moment the data that you need is on one piece of paper, and it goes with the truck. Let's take that example. The TP1 system, you can make it redundant. Of course, you can have two in the same country. We have not worked out that part yet, but that's from a technical point of view, it's not that difficult. The way you have redundant systems, if one goes down, then the other one takes over. Security-wise, we make sure that everything is set via protocols. One of the things that on TP1 level is the national authority needs to give us the certificate where they communicate with. So everyone in that national authority works under a certificate issued by the national authority that is verified on the TP1 level. So that is make sure that, at least from that point of view, there are different security parameters around that. Who can access the system, that you need to have these certificates in place, that we have indeed the security authorization. That's from a national authority level up to the system. Then you have the TP1 and the TP2 systems. They work together as well with double security. So they need to confirm, they need to approve each other and validate that the certificate information is there, that the authorization is correct. So the TP1 says, yes, I have a valid user and I'm checking on you, and the TP2 will validate if that is indeed a TP1 that is validated into the system, that is asking for the correct information, and only at that verification. So you have first the user who needs to validate, and the systems need to validate to each other before the information is released to the user who asked for it.
Okay.
And again, redundancy is something that's what we see in normal life as well. We have multiple systems that can follow up each other. That's redundancy of data. What you can't do, indeed, internet is not redundant. there's a lot of redundancies on cables between systems and connectivity, but it's also in day-to-day life, it's rare that systems go down for longer than a few minutes.
Okay, I hope that's answered David's question. And the last question, which I think is a bit more straightforward: when a shipper enters DG information, is there a way to check that it is entered correctly as per the DG regulations? Well, I'm guessing this is going to be linked into the your core business of DG Office and the way that it's going to
indeed, that's what we're doing. So that's what we're doing. But again,
if you'd
there
like
will
a
be
free trial. If you'd like a free trial of DG Office, then just please drop me a line or just put the question in the system there, and I can arrange for you to have a 30-day free trial, or anybody who's listening can have a 30-day free trial of DG Office.
Absolutely.
Anybody who's listening to this event, it's normally a 2-week trial, but for those who have been involved in this, we're quite happy to extend that to 30 days. I think that's all the questions. Herman, have you answered them all, do you think? I think so. I think that's
hope so.
Really...
and I said you will share the presentation afterwards, so I put in all the links to documentation. The Digitina one, it's all open source, so people can view and look with us what we're doing and what is the intention of everything. So, and if there are questions, they can drop them via you when they talk about DG Office, or when it's more in depth. Feel free to let me know, and we'll pick it up from there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Herman. And
Thank you.
Yeah, look forward to catching up with you soon. Okay. Cheers. Bye now.
Cheers. Bye.
Okay, and now our next presenter is Jonathan Lang, who's Business Development Consultant at NCEC. And he's going to talk about the requirements, regulations and expectations for the provision of level 1, which is telephone emergency response. Over to you, Jonathan. Yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear me? You good? Can't hear you now.
Okay, can you hear me now? I think you can hear me. Can you see my?
You now, Jonathan. Yeah, we've got you now.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Well, thank you all for joining. It's good to be here this afternoon. Thank you to Label Line for hosting this and having us with you. My name's John Lang. I'm a business development manager here at the NCEC now, but over the last 5 years, I've kind of done a bit of everything that the NCEC do. So I've been one of our 24/7 chemical emergency responders, and if any of you know a little bit about the NCEC, you'll know that's our primary service, where we support about 600 companies globally with chemical emergency response, which is something Herman just touched on, is important for the DG work that he's working on. Following that, I was senior part of our ER team and have also supported in our regulatory team. So, or as I like to say, I've kind of done a bit of everything. Today's a little bit of a strange environment. I guess it'd be good if we were doing this all in person, but the virtual approach has been working quite well. And I want to kind of spend today going through, touching on some of the requirements, but I think most importantly, looking at kind of some of the expectations when it comes to what we call level 1 emergency response. And I guess the best place to start with that is probably going to be, what is level 1 emergency response? So when a product leaves a manufacturer's or is being transported by a carrier, or leaves the carrier's site, be that a third-party warehouse or something similar, their ability to manage those handling it and the suitability of those handling it significantly decreases. And in the event that there is something happens, during that transport while it is off site to those that are using it, there's going to be an expectation that their responsible organisation is going to be able to help them. And actually, you know, what that is, how they're going to do that, and the first way they're going to contact that responsible organisation is via an emergency phone number. And that emergency phone number is what we would call level 1 emergency response, and it is what NCEC do, and it's going to be my focus for today. Now, the core reason that it's so important is that a failure for an organisation to respond if they have a level of responsibility, or to do that ineffectively, can have a significant impact on a business's reputation, finances, or even legal implications, let alone the health, well-being of those that might be affected. In this session, I'll be looking at the drivers for level 1 emergency response, both the requirements, but also most importantly, the expectations of what would be your customers and also authorities around the world, but mainly in Europe. But yeah, definitely globally in terms of authorities and some of the regulations that I'll touch on in a minute. I also want to discuss the themes of what best practice looks like. And I know that due to costs or some other restrictions, best practice may not be achievable by everyone on this call, but we'll discuss how to use that as kind of a benchmark to improve what you have in place. I'm hoping that by the end of my session, and trying to keep it as short as possible to not bore you, but hopefully by the end of the session, you'll all have an idea of kind of next steps of what you could do to be looking at level 1 emergency response. And I know my colleagues Nick, my counterparts Nick and Aaron will be talking more about their emergency response obligations in the US, or level 3 emergency response, which I guess comes later in the process after level 1 emergency response. And hopefully by the end of the day, those themes will all tie together across the sessions that Label Line have put together. So I guess it wouldn't be an NCEC presentation, and it wouldn't be a presentation on emergency response requirements if I didn't start with regulations. And regulations form the foundation of what I'm talking about today. They form the foundation of doing the right thing. And I could probably do a full hour, 2-hour session on the regulations, but realistically, they are the minimum requirement. There are still organisations I know who will have a duty mobile or a switchboard as their emergency number on their documentation. And quite frankly, and being quite bluntly, that's not good enough to meet, you know, any regulation or any customer expectation. That, you know, that duty mobile presents so many risks to a response that it really is not the minimum. The minimum is meeting the regulations for the markets that you are operating in. Now, these regulations change a lot. We've done a lot of work on these regulations, and we have a number of webinars and sessions on our website. I know Label Line have information on transport regs, and when it comes to emergency response, are able to give guidance, as are we. And if you are interested in more in regulations, then please visit our website. But I think it's important to note that there are the standard transport regulations that we're all aware of: IATA, IMDG, ADR, which have links to this. There's REACH Annex 2, which says, you know, as part of an SDS obligation, you have to have an emergency number in. And then there are country-specific regulations from around the world. China has SORS Order 53, which is quite strong regulations. In the US, for transport, there's 49 CFR. In Norway has its own specific regulations now when it comes to emergency response. Mexico similarly. And these are all regulations that are varying different levels of requirements, local language requirements, local number requirements, and really to do a session on them would be quite hard in the time today. And also is not what we want to be focusing on, because you are all involved in regulatory affairs. You all have an interest in regulations, I guess, or you wouldn't really be on this session. And there is a lot of information out there already on this. What I want to focus on today is actually more than the regulations? What should a business that cares be doing that's more than just meeting the regulations, and why you should be doing more than just the regulations? And one of the first steps to that is often the first challenge we get whenever someone at the NCEC says that, which is, well, we only need to meet the regulations because a real incident won't happen to us. A real incident doesn't happen to us. And I'd agree. To a lot of businesses, something like this isn't going to happen. This is a bit of an extreme example, admittedly. But the important point is it does happen. Things go wrong. And when things go wrong involving dangerous goods, things can go really wrong. Someone dealing with an incident like this is going to be very involved and is going to want a certain level of support from anybody that they can, including the transporter, carrier, a third-party company, their own support network, or the manufacturer. They're going to be wanting tactical support and advice for when something goes wrong involving dangerous goods. And they will want that advice quickly. And when I'm talking about when we're talking about the contact here, we're talking about emergency services dealing with this. We're talking about a fire officer responding to an incident like this. And in that case, that fire officer doesn't just want a safety data sheet. They don't just want a dangerous goods note. They don't just want the UN number off the back of the vehicle. Those are all useful and they're really good first steps. But for emergency services to really deal with incident, they want to be speaking to someone that has an improved product knowledge and an improved knowledge when it comes to response procedures to apply that information to the specific incident and give actual advice on how to deal with it. And it could just as easily be a fire officer who has called this number, who has responded to this incident, or it could be, maybe not this size type of incident displayed in this photo, but it could be a hairdresser who spilt a product at their salon that could be ringing for the advice. So it's not just a number that's going to be able to give information for a fire officer, it's a way that a company can provide details following an incident that's going to support anyone. And the main question is, can what your company's level 1 emergency response setup is at the moment do that? If that number that's on your SDS or on your dangerous goods note or listed next to your products as the emergency number realistically provide a level of advice that's going to be the expectation of the person calling? Or is it just a health and safety officer? Is it one of you on this call now with the duty mobile? Do you have the duty mobile in your pocket that realistically could go off at any moment and you might be expected to answer that call? Or is your response an English number with English language response? And actually, if you trade in a lot of Southeast Asia or any of the countries that have specific regulations like Norway or China, the expectation there is they're not going to ring. Prime example of that is Japan. I'm not sure many of you will trade into Japan, but Japanese people will not call an English number. They will expect the number to be Japanese. They will expect the answer to be in Japanese. So if your current setup can't respond appropriately, is that actually okay for your business? And actually, the main element you've got to consider about is that okay for your business is we talk about PAIR when it comes to risk management. Those of you might have heard that before. That's people, the environment, assets, and reputation. I think when it comes to reviewing this, the most important one of those and the hardest to sometimes visualize is the reputation. A good example, for instance, is if this truck was blazoned with your business's logo all over it, you could probably see, where the risk to people is, where the risk to the environment is, and where the risk to the assets is. But what about the reputational damage? If this suddenly appears in a media shot or in a newspaper with your vehicle's logo on it, the headline is going to say tanker carrying company X chemicals on fire has closed road in both directions. There may be no fault to lay at your door, but the media and the reputational risk there, your name is going to be mentioned, and that's going to have an impact on the perception of your business. And it can be easy to think, well, we're not responsible. We don't take responsibility for dangerous goods. That always sits with the product manufacturer. Or if you are the manufacturer, you may say, well, as soon as it leaves our site, the response is the responsibility of the carrier. And that's probably fair from a legal perspective. That might be what your contracts say. But I think as a starting point, I'd like to counter that from two key elements. First, corporate social responsibility. A requirement for many of you on this call will be some sort of CSR program, or you may have your own responsible care responsibilities. US companies may be aligned to the responsible care principles that are laid out by the American Chemistry Council over in the USA. Or some of you may be ISO accredited. Anyone that's got ISO 14001 accredited certificates, there's a requirement in that standard that has an environmental emergency response impact. And the underlying principle of these is that whoever designs, produces, uses, manufactures, transports, sells, pretty much touches a product in any way, shape, or form has a responsibility for minimizing that impact throughout its whole life cycle. So that's from the user at the end use, following the instructions, through to the manufacturer, making sure that those instructions and the safety information are correct. Ultimately, in the case of a major incident involving that product throughout its supply chain, the manufacturer would have a level of responsibility, because from an emergency response perspective and from our experience at NCEC, they are the ones that have the most information on the product, what's in it, how it behaves. But while that product is with a carrier, or while that product is sitting in your warehouse, or while that product is on the shelves of the shop that is selling it, the company there, that organization, has a responsibility to make sure that if something happens to that product, there is a way that the response and there is a way that that incident can be dealt with. And that's really from a company's natural duty of care perspective. And again, the impacts of that link back to PAIR, as we've talked about: people, environment, assets, and reputation. And the least tangible, but potentially most impactful to a business's bottom line, is probably the other one, where I really think just because you may not be legally responsible doesn't mean you don't have a level of responsibility. And that's because everyone's reputation can be impacted. You may not feel the need to have a product stewardship approach or a detailed response program because of a product that you just carry or you store for a couple of days. But if something was to happen, if the worst was to happen, it's going to be your name that is associated with that product. If you take, and the worst incidents, and they probably will never happen in the UK because of our standards, but you take things like the Tianjin incident from a few years ago, or Beirut even more recently, more than just the company that was storing those materials that resulted in the incident were, to put it nicely, dragged through the press in terms of could they have done more. If your name is in any way associated with that product, then you have a reputational perspective to make sure that if something happens, you are able to support the response and the way that that incident is dealt with as best as possible. And actually, stepping away from dangerous goods, that kind of viewpoint can be considered for what is currently going on with COVID. From a business perspective, we are looking at another period of lockdown in the UK, and different nations are at different stages of dealing with it. But we're starting to get to a stage where a lot of members of the public, and I speak from experience when I say this, I look at companies and see how they've dealt with this. Have they furloughed a lot of staff? Have they shut down a lot of stores? Have their customer service levels dropped because of the way they dealt with this? Are they is their response appropriate? And you can take that and look at it from if that was a chemical incident, customers might be looking at you as a business and going, is your response appropriate? Now, I've obviously gone to a lot more macro, wider level there, talking about reputation and COVID. So how does that tie to level 1 emergency response? Well, when something happens, be that a major transport fire or even a missing shipment, one of the first means that your customer or member of public or the fire service are going to try and reach out to your organisation when something goes wrong is that level 1 emergency response number on your product documents. So what does that need to do? Well, when you consider your level 1 ER process, you need to start looking at some of the themes of how that should be set up to overcome some of the challenges. First of these is access. I mentioned earlier on, people are going to expect a quick response. That's element number 1, but they're going to expect it to be easy for them. That means local language, local number, and 24/7, and reliably 24/7. So that's not, oh, we've got a switchboard number for out of hours, they can leave a message and we'll pick it up in the morning. That's not, oh, it will ring through to our director's mobile, because your director mobile at 3 AM is probably shut in his bedside table and he's not going to answer it, or he's going to be fast asleep. So it's actually, the expectation and the access bit has to go above and beyond the regulations. It's not just doing the minimum, but it's having an assurance in place that when something happens, the best response you can do as an organisation is available. And it has to be relevant. And I talk about relevance in terms of something that's quite big for us at the moment is a lot of people come to us and say, well, our emergency response is great. It provides the SDS, it provides the information. That's all we need it to do. But an SDS isn't proportional. It's not, SDSs are deliberately designed to be generic. A UN number is generic. A proper shipping name is generic. They're not relevant to the SIM. If you were to take a 10 milliliter spill of hydrochloric acid versus a 100 litre spill of hydrochloric acid, the SDS, the UN number, the dangerous goods note for those are all going to be almost identical. They're going, especially the SDS is going to be the same. Actually, the information that's needed to respond to an incident involving those spillages is completely different. And that's where the relevance is important, to have experts at the end of the phone who don't just understand the product, but also understand incident response and how incident response should be done. I touched on it just then, advice rather than just information. When someone rings your emergency response number, just giving them the SDS, just reading information isn't enough if you're looking to do what your customers expect. Again, they could be a hairdresser ringing. If you just read what's off the SDS, that's going to make no difference to their situation. The capability of the caller and what they're able to do should change the advice that's given. It's more than just the information that's off the SDS. It also shouldn't be a case of the first person they speak to can only give them that information, and then they have to recontact somebody else, or the company has to contact them to give the further advice. There should be, because that access is so important, there should be an easy flow of getting all the advice that's needed to mitigate the incident as quickly as possible. And the final, which I will touch on a bit more in terms of themes in a minute, is value. And that's value to both the caller from a perspective of they resolve the incident, they can get on with their life, but also from your business in both a responsive perspective, but also a proactive focus. And it's important, some of you will have come across where these response themes kind of come from, and where we've pulled them from is actually the CEFIC guidelines when it comes to level 1 emergency response. So anyone that's a manufacturer operating in chemicals in Europe will have heard of CEFIC, which is the European Chemical Industry Council Association in Europe, and they have a level 1 guidance on exactly what level 1 emergency response should be aspiring to. And obviously the US and Asia Pacific have similar organisations and similar levels of guidance or regulations available. So why is this important? Well, I want to highlight the importance of getting this right. Firstly, to your reputation, as I've mentioned, reputation is a key critical element of this, but also to your business. The value that your stakeholders see in your business. So this graph here plots the stakeholder value against time. So this was done by a metrics company based in Oxford Metrics, based on major incidents and how different organisations respond to them. And those with a positive approach are on the red line, so those that proactively mitigate, have put in best practice approaches, corporate social responsibility principles within the business, saw on average a 7% increase in stakeholder value over the first 250 days after the incident. As you can imagine, the purple line shows the opposite. Those that were quite reactionary in their response, those that kind of dealt with the incident or dealt with the response only once the incident happened. And they saw roughly a 15% decline on average of their input. Now, this graph, as I said, is a reflection of major incidents, but I think it could be useful, look at it on a micro scale, look at it specifically for a single incident, and you can imagine how the importance of taking a proactive approach, a best practice approach, over one that ticks the box and just does the minimum might have a significant difference if and when an incident happens. What about wider value? Well, best practice emergency response doesn't just derive value from if an incident happens. It certainly can bring value to stakeholders. Customer safety is priority number one, but also to your supply chain partners. Most major incidents are going to likely be in transit, and more than one company will be involved. Or even to your competitors. Some of you may have heard mutual aid schemes like Bromade, where competitors actually support each other with response in case of incidents involving high-risk materials. In the case of Bromade, bromine. And it's important to note that the mitigating the risk from a sustainability perspective, I guess, is where some of the wider regulations come in. Things like the SCIP hazard database in Europe or the REACH regulations come back into the thinking about that much wider chemical risk approach as an organisation who is involved in chemicals or dangerous goods. And going even wider than that, the UN sustainability goals, the 17 UN sustainability goals, are big top-level drivers at the moment for doing the right thing in terms of climate change and sustainability. A number of these goals set out things around sound chemical safety management, so reducing the release of chemicals or reducing the hazards from chemicals. So actually, a sound emergency response procedure and best practice level 1 emergency response being part of that actually has much wider connotations up to and including, a business's ultimate sustainability drive led by those sustainability goals. And I guess the point is that either directly or indirectly, having some level of robust emergency response, starting with the level 1 phone number, can directly support you as an organisation to achieve value. So what should and what could you do now? And as I mentioned right at the beginning, we appreciate that, that very local language in every country, all our markets covered with a local number isn't possibly as relevant and as achievable for everyone. Having an emergency response service that gives access, relevance, advice and value as themes and is great. And it's something we should all be striving for, but it's not always in reach for a number of factors for different organisations. But you can use it to benchmark yourself, drive improvement internally, and recognise the benefits that can come from that. Our advice is to, if you are interested or want to do something, start off by looking at your full supply chain. Where are you involved in the supply chain, and what are the risks to your business from a pair, people, environment, assets, and reputation perspective, and then map these risks against how you would currently respond to them. So be that the level 1 emergency response number or other means. And do your arrangements stack up to what you would expect? Do they stack up to the regulations? And probably the biggest takeaway, hopefully, from today is, do they stack up to your corporate social responsibility? Do they stack up to the potential reputational impact? Or do they stack up to what your customers around the world are going to expect if and when they call that phone number or need that service? And I guess it could be easy to go through this process and for me to say this and, pinpoint and go, oh, our arrangements are not good enough. But then the change is the challenge. We would say the cost of change is rarely as significant as people think, but in the current financial climate, people might go, well, this is one more change that we really don't need to do. I hope I've highlighted that there are serious potential risks, both financial and reputational, that are going to damage the business a lot more than the cost to put in something that's going to help the business. Basic emergency response arrangements and the risks around them, if it's a mobile phone or a switchboard, the potential risks and the potential costs that could cause if an incident does happen is significantly more than the cost of just putting in something that gives 24/7 access and has experts at the end of the phone 24 hours a day. And help's available. That's what NCEC do. The National Chemical Maintenance Centre, we help about 600 companies globally to tackle that problem. We work with them, be they the world's largest chemical producer to a home oil supplier based in Essex, which only has 3 tankers. So do reach out, do speak to people. You know, it's something that I think is worth exploring if you have sustainability drivers, or you are a business looking at environmental or social governance, or even if you're just trying to have an improved level of corporate care, corporate product stewardship, however you want to call it. This is a small part of it, but is an important first step along a roadmap to make sure you get it right. NCEC, you know, to have a product safety and regulatory compliance team as well that can obviously bring in some of the regulatory elements I've talked about, reach the SCIP database, one of the ones that's on the rise at the moment, poison centres, and kind of everything we do is based on helping organisations. So feel free to contact us via the details here, or have a look on our website. We've got a number of free resources which goes into kind of what I've talked about in a lot more detail, be that the legal standards or kind of the business case for kind of best practice, top level professional emergency response. But these are all available on our website, or, you know, in the easiest terms, please do just contact us via the phone number or the email if you want to talk about what your current setup, or if you're a current client and you're concerned about, you know, the level of response you currently have, or you're looking to change it, or looking to help in terms of reviewing or testing your current setup. But thank you very much for listening today. I hope there was something useful in there for you. Richard, any questions?
Hello, Jonathan. Yes, we have. Just one question, and that's about safety data sheets and the need for a telephone number for poison centres. Does that negate the need for a telephone number for emergency response? So, for example, a service provision like you offer.
I think that's a very good question. I think that probably goes back to that regulatory level again. So poison centres, for those who don't know, they're a toxicological service, and there's a new requirements or updated requirements, let's say, under the CLP regulations in Europe around notification and the provision of poison centre phone numbers, as Richard said, on safety data sheets. But that poison centre number has significant limitations in terms of that poison centre number often can only be contacted by a medical professional. That poison centre number will only deal with human toxicological inquiries, so exposures to people. They will not deal with anything outside of that remit. So if it is a spill, if it's an RTC, if it's a tanker leak, or if it's even an animal exposure, a poison centre is not going to deal with that. So our advice, poison centres are regulatory required, and this is specifically talking about Europe. Poison centres are required by regulations, but they're not going to cover everything, and our number works to cover everything that a poison centre doesn't work. And obviously, when you step outside of Europe, there aren't the strict regulations around poison centres. So if you're trading outside of Europe, there are no poison centre requirement, and that's where our emergency number or your emergency number can plug in as well for your shipments going outside of Europe.
Excellent. Well, that's it, John. Thank you very much. I think we'll take a short break, but before we take a short break, and it'll only be like 3 or 4 minutes, we have some breaking news in that for those of you who are interested in the transport of dangerous goods by air, the IATA dangerous goods regulations will be starting to be shipped from label line during week commencing the 5th of October. So that's the news that's just come in just now. Jonathan, thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you,
excellent
Richard.
stuff. We'll catch up later. Enjoy the rest of the show, and we'll have a short break now. Okay, I think it's time for a resumption. We are running a little bit late. All these things tend to run on for whatever reason, but I hope that you've all found it interesting so far. So I'm now going to introduce Nick Bailey, a former colleague of mine. He's a Hazmat and CBRN Director at APAC Response. He's going to talk about the expectations and resources for the provision of level 3, which is cleanup response at the time of an incident. So emergency response in Europe and UK. So over to Nick. You good, Nick? Can't hear you. Microphone. Top button.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep. Okay.
Can
Good
you
luck.
see me? And is my screen showing?
Yes, all's good.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks, Richard, for inviting me to speak at the Labour Line Biennial Dangerous Goods web show. Firstly, a little bit about us. We are a UK company, formerly Braemar Response. We were bought by the Ambipar Group a couple of years ago. So we now have Brazilian parents, and they're a much bigger entity than us in South America. They have 150 bases for emergency response. Firstly, thanks to Jonathan, because although he was talking about level 1, it was a great introduction to all levels of response for chemical emergencies. I've got some slides at the end to talk about some specific incidents across Europe, some nitrocellulose in Genoa, some titanium tetrachloride in Zeebrugge, and some polymeric bead incidents, which were in several venues across Europe over the last couple of years or so. So the guidelines for level 1, 2 and 3 response come from CEFIC, which is the European Chemical Industry Council, which was founded in 1972. It's the voice of large, medium and small chemical companies across Europe. And the ICE acronym in this case corresponds to International Chemical Emergency. There are about 13 ICE acronyms that I found on the internet, and 3 of them are to do with emergencies. So you've got in case of emergency, individual chemical exposure, which is the rather unfortunate instances of people doing themselves harm with chemicals, and of course this one, which is the international chemical emergency symbol. So the contents of the CEFIC guidelines for level 1, 2 and 3 incident response are relevant pan-Europe and in the UK. So I've just highlighted there the parts relevant to level 3 response. So that companies need a plan, described briefly the scope, the skills required and the outlines at a very high level, the training requirements. Now, I won't go into each and every part, as the same things keep cropping up in all of the sections. All the requirements in each section seem to be very, very similar. But the definition of level 3 response, again, it's quite high level, is assistance with equipment and personnel on scene of the incident when requested by the authorities. The requirements for level 3 are to have level 2 skills, which are eyes and ears on scene for level 1 or the control center that's actually running the incident, and the ability to give advice on scene as to what to do to actually mitigate the incident, clean up, whatever all the requirements are to make it back as it was. And then it's a provision of suitable equipment and people to the scene to carry out the intervention in a calm and organized, safe manner for the company that has the incident. The scope in the plan, it says it requires a prompt response, and that used to mean a target time of a 3-hour response for level 3. That seems to have faded away from the CEFIC guideline now. And one company I spoke with in Europe now have a guideline time to leave site within 2 hours in order to go to an incident. And another company I spoke with have a guideline time of 6 hours to arrive at an incident in the country that they're based. And if they're responding in Europe to adjacent countries, they have a guideline response time of better than 12 hours to get there. So we're probably talking about really the major incidents there for something like a 12-hour response time. So it's quite interesting to note that CEFIC say that it's usually impractical for chemical companies to provide level 2 and 3 response at offshore shipping incidents. Appropriate response in such cases requires, they say, good relationships with the competent authorities and a network of contracts with marine specialists in other chemical companies or shipping companies. Now, looking at the International Maritime Organization website, competent authorities that can respond to such incidents are quite few and far between. Spain and Finland say that they can respond. Most of the rest of the countries that have answered say that they can't respond. And both France and Belgium appear on the list, but they haven't actually committed themselves as to whether they can or can't respond. But we do know that CEDRA in Brittany in France are a government organisation that advise the military to respond under such circumstances. The guidance then goes on to cover the training aspects that are required for level 3 response, and it stresses again that only land incidents are covered in this training. So they say what you need to know is how incident works from the point of view of a multi-agency response. So who's in charge when you arrive, who's there on scene, who do you need to liaise with, who do you actually need to operate with in order to get in and mitigate the circumstances. And then suddenly it gets quite technical with the principles of operation and design and construction of road tankers and tank containers. Well, the way that we get around that is that we have a couple of engineers on the books, but generally we work with the company's fleet engineer, and that way we would avoid any embarrassing moments that could occur in a response. Items 4 and 5 cover the packaging and labelling that you might need to cover during an incident if you put products into salvage packaging, for instance. And that we cover by having access to DGSAs on the staff. And then it's a case of just having the pumps and the sorbents, the mops and the buckets, the gas monitors, the suitable PPE, and the training to know how to use it all. Now, CEFIC suggests that a whole course, including all of that about the road tanker workings, the DGSA requirements, the whole course takes about 3 days. Well, a DGSA alone qualification takes 5 days, and I'm not quite sure how long it takes to become an engineer, but I would suggest that it was quite a superficial training course in order to cover all of those requirements for level 3 response according to that course. So who should respond? So since this involves deploying skilled manpower and equipment to the incident site, it says it can normally only be expected from the larger manufacturers and those that are signatory to product-specific schemes, such as chlorosylanes, ethylene oxide, etc. So I think this is where at least some of Europe and the UK differ. In both cases, in the transport incident, the transport incident is under the control of the emergency services. But in Europe, the fire and civil protection take a much more proactive role in running the incident. If they need to bring in specialist companies, and it's up to them whether they do or whether they don't, then that's what happens. France, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, for example, no matter whose product it is, they have contracts with companies like Solvay, BASF, SGS, Curium, and they just call them in to assist when it's necessary. They then work to the administrations, and the company who has the incident just gets the bill at the end, and they have no control whatsoever as to how the incident is dealt with. In the UK, it's still the emergency services that are in charge, but after the initial emergency phase, they would look for whoever owns the incident, either the transport company or the producer normally, to organise the cleanup through either their own level 3 response capabilities or through a contracted third party. So the administration and the emergency services would almost never, and I've never come across an instance when they have, but they would almost never go into contract and then present a bill for the end of the cleanup. In other parts of Europe, to those mentioned, France, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, Holland, I think the model is more akin to the UK model, where it's up to the individual companies to have their own resources or a contracted third party. But certainly in a lot of Western Europe, it's the likes of BASF and Solvay that are called in, no matter whose incident it is. Okay, so I have a few incidents across Europe that I can speak about briefly. This one was, well, we had 5 or 6 very, very similar incidents in Genoa with nitrocellulose, where a container was gassed up with ethanol vapor. Ethanol liquid is actually added to nitrocellulose in order to keep the product wet for transport. Getting to work on the port for the first time took weeks of negotiation, which again is quite a big difference, I suspect, to how it would be in Europe, in England or the UK. That negotiation finally culminated in the signing of a document called a douvre. Now, this document, we were led to believe in the weeks leading up to the signature, was a controversial legal document that must be signed. And we were called to a meeting of the producers, the fire service, the port representatives, the terminal representatives, the environmental health, and all sorts of multi-agency response personnel there. And the document was translated line by line, and it was about 10 pages long. It turned out that it was required, all it did was require us to obey the terminal rules, not interfere with the terminal activities, drive at the correct speed limit, and wear high-vis clothing. And it also required the terminal not to interfere with our activities for the duration of the operation. So it was a two-way document, but it was completely non-controversial after weeks of negotiation. So we signed that and started work the next day. So each container in this these 5 incidents had around 80 pallets, 9 boxes per pallet, with a total of 720 boxes, each of 26 kilograms, which the Italian administration described as 720 mini bombs. So they required all of the boxes to be placed in salvage packaging so that no vapor could escape. And to that end, we ordered 240 salvage drums from Belgium, and these arrived in 3 trucks at a cost of around 130,000 euros each time. So purchasing salvage packaging in Europe is almost impossible. The only source that we could find for Italy was a company in Belgium that made them. So each drum was loaded with 3 boxes, and then we filled 3 40-foot containers, which were then exported from Genoa. They were still not allowed to enter the country by any stretch of the imagination. Then in Zeebrugge, we were called in to deal with a tank of titanium tetrachloride. Titanium tetrachloride gives off water vapor, gives off very dense fumes, white fog with water vapor from the atmosphere. The port had been closed on 2 occasions because it had been reported that a mist was coming from the container, and we were called in to actually conduct a pressure test on the container, on the tank, sorry, tank container, to see whether it had been leaking or not. The picture in all good press coverage was while we had the container open so that we could put on some pressure gauges and actually connect the nitrogen up. So that's what it looked like. The photographs that I saw of the white mist could have been a sea mist. It was nothing like that had actually caused the incident in the first place. But we carried out a pressure test on the tank. There was no leak. There was no pressure drop during the test, and the tank was then allowed to travel back into the UK by sea. And then finally, we had 5 or 6 responses to polymeric beads across Europe, including in the UK and as far east as Croatia. So polymeric beads give off flammable vapor, so it's quite a simple task to transfer them into new bins, and all you actually need to worry about is making sure that the flow of beads is very short, and that to avoid a static build-up by making the flow very, very slow and controlled. So that's really my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. And Richard, are there any questions?
Hello, Nick. Let me just have a quick look. I haven't got any, just I think it's just interesting to see the different approaches that different countries have, and you know, it doesn't necessarily mean to say that once you've had an incident, they're going to call out an emergency response contractor like yourselves to deal with it. Different people have different controls, and that must make it, as you were highlighting, and Genoa there, a difficult situation sometimes for you to actually get on and do your work.
Yeah, indeed. There's language difficulties, obviously, but there are all sorts of other regulations that have to be complied with. And as I say, it's out of companies' hands when it's on mainland Western Europe. The administrations will decide what's to be done and who's to do it, and then all you do is get the bill at the end. If it's an incident that's probably not in transport or not causing a transport incident by blocking a road, then you may have more choice. But where the administration or the emergency services want to call in companies like Solvay and BASF, that's what they do, and you just get the bill at the end.
But in the UK, it's certainly advisable to have arrangements in place if you're moving dangerous goods to any great degree within the UK.
In the UK, the emergency services, once they've contained the situation by probably putting in a cordon, maybe doing some small amount of remedial work because of their MOU with the Environment Agency. After that, they step back and they ask either the producer or usually the transport company what arrangements they have in place for getting the cleanup done. And so that might be themselves, or it might be that they've got a contracted third party that is called in. Well, hopefully it's called in a little bit before that point. But,
yeah. Or they panic.
Now on scene and ready to respond.
Or they panic.
We have had one or two phone calls. Yes.
I think it's pretty seamless to move from the issues that you have to deal with in Europe to the issues in America, where even different states, as I understand, will put on different regulation, have different regulations. So I'm going to switch over now to Aaron.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you very much, Nick. And Aaron's right at the top because he's got 2 A's in his name, so that's nice and easy. Aaron, are you there? Aaron, here he is. Just need your recording on. Can you get your microphone on, Aaron? Top one. We can see you. Can't hear you.
Ah, there we go. I was muted by you or by the organizer. Can you hear me now?
I can see it. Yeah, I don't know how to mute you. I wouldn't know how to keep you quiet. I wouldn't. And I've got your screen as well. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, Aaron Montgomery is the CEO of Uray Group, environmental consultancy, but now expanding into many other areas of emergency response and remediation and tank cleaning and all sorts of other things. And he's going to talk about the resources and expectations for level 3 provision in the USA and in the Asia Pacific region. And if you're a global organization, there's so many things to consider, not just what Nick had to say in Europe, but what Aaron's about to say in other parts of the world. So over to you, Aaron.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah, Uray, we here at Uray, we conduct global emergency response, environmental services, chemical services. Our customers are primarily chemical manufacturers and transportation companies, large-scale chemical manufacturers, ISO tank operators, steamship lines. And we effectively work with our customers, and anywhere they have an incident or a need anywhere in the world, we can help them manage that to the best of our capabilities and to the best of the local capabilities, depending on the location of any particular need. I'll talk a little bit about here about what's needed on the back end, and then as it follows through on a proper chemical emergency response. To first and foremost, you need to work with your emergency response providers, whether that's level 1 or your level, am I showing the right screen? Okay, yeah, sorry. Whether that's your level 1 provider or your level 2, 3 provider, to make sure everybody's on the same page. We work closely with our customers to quote, be prepared. I think it's important to not only understand your chemistries that you are either transporting or offering as a shipper, but it's important that your vendors in the emergency response realm also have an understanding of what you're doing. And not just the chemistries, of course, but the containers that are being shipped in and the quantities that they're being shipped in. So as a responder, we work with thousands of different chemistries. We have, hundreds and thousands of customers shipping thousands of different chemistries and hundreds of different types of containers. Some of our customers have specialty containers. Most of our customers have specialty chemicals. So it's impossible for us to know 100% about every chemistry. And whenever it comes to an environment, an emergency response environment, it becomes even more difficult. Here at our offices, we've actually taken the liberty of some of the more hazardous materials, materials internally we call materials of high consequence, or MHC products. We have put together what we call Go books, and that's just an actual physical book, to the point those still exist, binder that has the SDS, some chemical industry knowledge, some pages we put together that offer a short abbreviation of some of the chemical properties. And we do that for things like anhydrosamines, chlorosilanes, some monomers, methyl methacrylate, ethylene oxide, those types of materials. But nobody is going to understand your product like the manufacturer, like you will. So to be able to communicate that and work with your responder is important. Again, what are your products? What volumes are they shipping? Are they being shipped in? Are they limited quantities? Are they ISO tanks? Are you shipping in bulk vessel? Does your responders have the capabilities to hook up to those containers? ISO tanks have British standard threads on them, and some responders don't have any way of hooking into the bottom outlet valve of a T11 ISO tank. So is that something that is there a gap that needs to be filled? Where are your products traveling to? Are you shipping them from Europe to America, United States, or Brazil, or China, or somewhere a much smaller environment that may have even less capabilities? And who are your transporters? If you're offering it as a shipment, who are your transporters? What are their responsibilities, and what kind of capabilities do they have? As NCEC said earlier, if you're offering as a shipper, your agreement may state that as soon as the transporter signs the transportation line of the manifest, it is their responsibility. But if you're a large brand, deep-pocketed chemical manufacturer, that doesn't always work out as planned, especially whenever you consider your name recognition and your responsible care principles. And then what is your liability kind of works into that. And what are your response drivers? As you move from different regions of the world, there are different regulations, different understanding of what everybody's responsibilities are. So, as we move through the world and as we conduct services, these are the response drivers that we see most often. Obviously, regulations, the government telling you have to do this. Danger to human life and health, that's pretty obvious. Is it due to a natural disaster, a hurricane, or tornadoes, or earthquakes, something like this? Where we get involved a lot of times, particularly internationally, and particularly where locations where regulations are sparse, is stop and delay in commerce. Is your customer need its product? and it cannot move for a variety of reasons. The material needs to be transloaded, an ISO tank needs to be repaired, whatever the case may be. Manufacturer stewardship, that gets back to CEFIC and American Chemistry Council, responsible care. Perhaps there are no regulations that dictate what must be done in any particular country. However, due to your own corporate responsibilities as a company, you've decided that you're going to follow the regulations of any, say, your home country, or again, responsible care. Product quality, so if the material is off spec, cannot be used by your customer, so if something needs to happen. Incompatible or unapproved containers, or what we call missed deliveries, where a particular chemistry gets put in the wrong tank at your customer site or at your site, so it has contaminated thousands of gallons of material in a bulk. But it really gets down to, regulations, life and health of people and the planet, and economics. Here actually, this photo here, we're on top of chlorosilane ISO tank. This material, chlorosilanes, work perfectly inside of a stainless steel container, but this container had been compromised, and whenever chlorosilanes react with moisture in the air, they begin to corrode and rust stainless, just like the rust of a regular steel. So you can see the rust coming down the side of the container there. And then challenges and resources in any particular country. What are those challenges? What are those resources? Again, that's part of being, that's part of being prepared. So where are you shipping these materials? What are the regulatory requirements in that country, at that port authority, in that mode of transportation, on that road or in that barge? Are there cultural or language barriers? Many times, cultural barriers can be more difficult than language barriers. Where is your release? Is it released into the water, released onto land? Historically, we don't do a lot of oil releases. We are primarily, again, our customers are chemical manufacturers, so we do a lot of chemistries. Oil can be quite easy on water in that it floats, so you have that to your advantage, whereas a lot of other chemistries do not. They are miscible or where they sink in water. So keeping it out of the water is key. Well, in any event, keeping it out of the water is key, but becomes more needed whenever it's a heavier than water material or is hydrophilic. So, and then your local contractor resources, if they exist, local internal resources and global support. So are you relying on contractors in any particular country? Are you relying on your own plant personnel or facility personnel in any particular country? And if need be, are you able to bring in global support, either from a company like ours or a company or your own personnel? And I think that's interesting right now. I mean, we just managed an incident in Brazil, where we had to completely rely on the local vendor, and we, in many cases, we may have sent a project manager there just to help oversee, make sure things go properly, and to liaise between our customer and the local personnel. But due to the COVID restrictions on travel, quarantining, it just didn't make sense. So providing outside global support has become more and more difficult. We actually had a crew of four or five folks in the Philippines conducting a neutralization of a very hazardous material that there was no capabilities for disposing of this material properly within the Philippines. And so we did the chemistry, we did the engineering, we did the manufacturing of the reaction vessels, shipped everything to the Philippines, and conducted that work. We were just in the middle of conducting that work when the COVID pandemic hit, and all foreign nationals were expelled from the Philippines. So it's a brave new world out there. Emergency response in the United States. So I'll just touch on this briefly. I know my time is pretty limited, but in the United States, one of the great benefits in larger regions that are joined together, like the United States and to a lesser extent in Europe, is you at least have a base set of regulations. In the United States, each state can then add over and above those regulations. So you have to work within the regulatory body of any state. We also have some state and some governmental reporting requirements to the National Response Center, and there's some thresholds there that need to be met. Once they are met, then those notifications to the NRC or the state and local governments must be notified. And then waste transportation and disposal also has some set requirements by the government, by the U.S. government under RCRA, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. However, each state can go above and beyond and require additional items. So in the United States, I think a lot, as Nick talked about, it's a lot more like the UK than in Europe. The fire department may be, or the highway patrol may be first on site to do any mediation. They may put containments down, but once that is done, the responders, your level 3 responders, should be there to conduct the cleanup, excavate the soil, clean the asphalt, conduct any transloading, anything like that. Has to be done by a contractor, will not be done, and probably should not be done by the authorities. So that very limited government capabilities. And then contractor capabilities, again, be prepared, know your contractor. Are they going to be able to respond to your commodity? Again, there's that material high consequence. Are you shipping chlorosilanes, ethylene oxide, those types of materials, chlorine? And does your responder have the equipment to be able to respond to that, the knowledge to be able to respond to that? And then how is all that bundled together? So typically in the United States, all of the billing is done on a time and materials basis. So you see the dollars that are being spent on the invoice down to the hour. Here we're conducting a material high consequence transload from a road tanker to an ISO T22 ISO tank. And then, yeah, the Asia Pacific region. So there is no base regulations throughout this region. Obviously, we're dealing with a lot of separate countries that are just sharing a region, a lot like, say, South America or Africa or something like this. Every country has its own politics, its own requirements, its own capabilities. And in some instances, it is more like continental Europe, as Nick said, where there isn't a lot of contractor support and the government does additional services. So in Taiwan is a good example. They have very, very good, through their EPA, they have very, very good response capabilities there to be able to handle. And there really isn't a great need for contractor support. However, outside of there, and I'm going to exclude Australia and New Zealand for this discussion, but because they're very much like the United States in the work we've done there. good contractor support. But there is a great need for contractor support outside of Taiwan and those areas. And the government may not have the capabilities that many of our customers believe that they do. So there is, where is Asia coming from? Where is it going? Particularly in China and in some of the continental Asia countries, as the economies have grown and as the chemical industry in these countries have grown, so has the need for additional regulation and enforcement. I think is a good key there, is the enforcement of those regulations that may have been on the books for a long time. And what are the responsibilities of the people conducting business in those areas? And how are you, the chemical manufacturer, the transporter, dealing with those? So what is your approach to the response? So are you providing dual trained? You training your plant personnel? Are you working with a response contractor? I put the word monopoly in here because in many of the countries, it really is a response monopoly as far as contractors. So there's really only one choice. They're quite expensive from a fee-based system that is requiring that you pay a fee every year just for the right of having the capability to respond, or you're relying on your transporters. And then what are the training obstacles? The undistributed costs, so training your own staff, taking them out of their day-to-day business. Same with transporters. Transporters want to transport, chemical manufacturers want to manufacture chemicals. So what are the costs associated with training those personnel outside of their daily task? And that's really where the Asia Pacific Response Consortium came from. Back in October of 2018, Chemours contacted us and said, hey, help us get a handle on chemical emergency response in the Asia Pacific region. We worked with them very closely to develop an inventory for the kinds of materials that that they have they may have a response need for. Obviously, a lot of times the most dangerous chemistries, you don't respond to them very often. The containers have come to a point where they're extremely robust. However, what if, looking forward, what if something happens? So we worked with them very closely and developed that, and developed it in the countries in which they need. And a tip of the hat to Chemours, they're very proactive. It comes from the old DuPont structure where they were extremely proactive on their emergency response, and it paid dividends in how they manage their organization. So we put together an inventory. We in conjunction with them, and we put together pricing, and it was going to be a lot of money. So Chemours says, this is a great idea. This is what we need. This is what the industry needs. Let's go to the market. So we went to the market. We went to our customers. They went to their vendors, and we had incredible feedback to the point where we had our Singapore summit, where we had personnel from all over the world, all over Asia, of course, from the United States, Europe come, and we had our Singapore summit. From there, we were really able to understand the needs of the chemical industry, and we were able to develop a path forward. So from that, we have a proposal, and we are pushing that forward still. It got hit pretty hard by the COVID pandemic, obviously, in the recession that came after that, or that we are probably still in. But we are still, as URA, moving forward to drive this consortium forward with our chemical partners like DuPont, INEOS, Dow, Lubrizol, and many others to drive this forward. So I know that's a pretty quick view of a very, very broad subject. But yeah, was there any questions?
Hello, Aaron. Thank you. Well, it's great to get a different perspective, and I'm sure you must be, you know, it's a little bit of a shame that you've been curtailed with the developments that you just kicked off in the other parts of the world by this pandemic. But we're all having to do things differently. And yeah, I've just got one question. I'm not sure whether it's in for Nick or for you, but I guess the answer is going to come from one of you. So there is an ISO. This is from Roy Bonham, who says there is an ISO standard for the fittings on tank containers, the ISO 9669, as I think you were referring to with the British standard earlier. He says this specifies, among other things, the threads and types of flange that should be used on tank containers. In your opinion, are people being briefed properly on this standard and applying it in the ones that you come across?
Well, this is a two-phase answer to that, really. I think from a response standard, no, there aren't a lot of, especially when you get out of the port cities, there aren't a lot of contractors that have the correct 3-inch BSP standard thread for the bottom outlet valve, as it were, of a T11 ISO tank. Now, if you look at it from the other side and talk about loading and repairing of an ISO tank, yeah, I think mostly people are pretty well understanding of the specific threads and the specific standards that are associated with that. We see, of course, because of the nature of our business, we see the worst. I mean, we've seen, effectively converted T11s, badly converted T11s holding items like chlorosilane, where they really ought to be in a T22 or a properly built T14, because any of those chlorinated materials, if it gets any moisture at all, it will eat the stainless. But generally, those are actually coming from Asia, and being loaded in and the containers are being used too long. They should be managed a little better, so they don't see us. You don't want these containers to see us. That means something's wrong.
Okay. And got one more question from Arasti Badri, who says that he's asked, is the participation in the Asia Pacific Response Consortium still open?
Yes, it is. We're actually looking for members. That is kind of the point now where we're at, is we have a whole lot of chemical manufacturers interested, and trying to get that through procurement, through legal, and trying to find new members so we can effectively spread out the costs so that it's cheaper for everyone, is the idea. And so that instead of having, many of the companies are paying a fee in Japan, paying a fee in China and Singapore and India, being able to cover all of those regions with equipment and pay one fee and deal with one consortium, and to have your assets covered. But yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely more than happy to provide information on that, and in any way I can.
Okay, well, maybe I'll broker the introduction outside of this. So on that note, I think it's great. Sorry to have got you up so early this morning.
No problem.
In Denver. It's been great to have you on board, Aaron. It's lovely to see you again. And
yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much for your participation and for your interesting presentation.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Aaron. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye now. Okay. Well, so I'm now going to introduce Peter Mackay. Now, we are running a little bit late, and Peter's got a 3 o'clock appointment with the rest of the world on his weekly thoughts. So I'll be very brief. Peter is the editor-in-chief of HCB, formerly Hazardous Cargo Bulletin. It's the world's leading publication for the multimodal transport of dangerous goods. They're our event media partner, and there's an article in September, the current edition of HCB, are out about this event. So if you're in the world of dangerous goods, you should really be subscribing to HCB. But now he's going to draw on his 35 years experience in the dangerous goods industry to summarise and comment on the multimodal regulatory changes that we've heard about over the last 3 weeks. So I'm now going to go over to Peter Mackay. Are you there, Peter? I've got your screen. I've unmuted you somehow. It defaulted to muted, but can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you. We can't see you. We can see you.
Oh.
We just need your screen on full show, please. It's not on.
Right, right. It was so bossy, Richard.
Yeah, sorry to be a little bit late, but I hope you can squeeze it in for your later appointment. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Yes, and I will try and whiz through this as quickly as I can, because I know everybody else is expecting to be back at their other tasks in 5 minutes. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Label Live, for giving me the opportunity to speak and wrap up this third biennial show, having sat in the chair at the first 2 biennial roadshows. It's a shame we can't be joining in person. Good to see a lot of the presenters actually, and thanks very much to everybody for those. Thank you, particularly Aaron. I was very disappointed not to be able to come to Colorado earlier in the year to see your symposium, but I'm glad to hear that progress is still being made. Anyway, this is me. I'm Editor-in-Chief of HCB and have been for about 25 years now. Richard will tell you all about that if you ask him nicely. I'll probably owe him a beer at some point, but there you go. My job is really to summarise certainly the regulatory presentations that have been given during these 3 afternoon webinars. And I have to say that these are my own personal observations and opinions, so don't sue me, or don't sue Label Line anyway. Looking at what's hot and what's not, and some problems I see awaiting. Aaron spoke about the difficulties that he's experienced during the COVID lockdowns and travel restrictions and social distancing and so on. And he's obviously not alone. This is why we're doing this by GoToWebinar. But also the regulators have had the same sort of problems. And so here we are now, we're right at the end of September. The new regulations will be with us in just over 3 months, and yet there are still some uncertainties, which makes it difficult to plan, makes it difficult to know quite what to do about some things, and raises the possibility as well, I think, of modal disharmony in certain areas. So the timing is a particular issue. Not that we're not used to that, for heaven's sake. When we look, I'm going to be looking at the air mode. I should be looking at European land transport, surface transport, IMDG code, and the position in the US with 49 CFR. And those of you who work in the business are well used to the fact that the deadlines and the changeovers to new regulations are completely mismatched. For instance, the air mode. I put IATA here, but of course, you know, the ICAO technical instructions are the legal document. But most of you who operate in the business, I'm sure, will be using the IATA dangerous goods regulations, and the 62nd edition will take effect promptly on the 1st of January. I'm told that it will be available in a few weeks. I think Richard mentioned this earlier. in hard copy, and there are online versions already available. IATA has done its usual good job of presenting a list of significant changes. You can get to it through the Label Line website. I also had a marketing email from IATA this morning, and I think it's now available at a fairly easy DGR page on the IATA website. There's also some chat on that email from IATA about why do we change the rules every year, and of course, you know, they're following the changes in ICAO on a biennial system like everything else. But IATA updates every year. Why? Well, there are some things they say that are just too safety critical to be left, which is fair enough. One has to realise, of course, as well that IATA is a trade association for the airlines, and during this COVID-affected year, the airlines aren't doing very well at all. So I'm sure they'll be glad of the money as well. Again, that's my own personal opinion, and not to be written down and quoted against me. So yes, January the 1st for IATA for air. Let's look at Europe. ADR for road, RID for rail, and ADN for inland waterways. These all take effect on the 1st of January, but within the EU, and I assume anyway, the UK, there will be a 6 month transition period. So you don't have to comply until the 1st of July. As we speak, these have not actually been finalised. They are due for formal adoption, I understand. I think Caroline Rain from NCC mentioned this in the first web show, due for formal adoption on Thursday. I have seen lists of changes, well, a list of changes to RID, which is available on the OTIF website. And there's a link there if you need to see it. There is not at this point a list of consolidated changes for ADR or ADN, I don't believe. I did, because I had to write a piece summarising the ADR changes for HCB's October issue. And there are 3 different documents, in fact, which I had to consolidate myself in order to do that. But hopefully within the next few weeks we'll know more, and I understand from Label Line that the hard copy publications will be out in November. They'll also be available, certainly ADR and ADN will be available in online form on the UNECE website, as they always are. So that's that. The maritime side, IMDG code, Amendment 4020. Well, we know about the C node. Again, this will take effect on the 1st of January 2021, but it won't be mandatory for another year. I hear differing stories about whether the carriers want you to switch over sooner rather than later, which is probably a good idea from a modal harmonisation point of view anyway. But for the next year, until the end of 2021, you can still use Amendment 3918. I have seen a draft of Amendment 4020, which is what I've used as the basis for any comments that I make later on. I'm not entirely sure when it's going to be adopted formally. The Maritime Safety Committee, which is the parent committee that will have to do that, is due to meet early in November in virtual form. The last session of the subcommittee on the cargo and containers, or containers and cargo, didn't meet. So the changes that we have so far, and this goes also for ADR and ADN, are based on a short biennial session in effect. So in lots of ways, there probably aren't the number of changes that we would normally expect. If you think that's confusing, then you know, go to the USA. The Hazardous Materials Regulations, HMR, as they are properly called, which are found in Title 49 of the Code of Federal Regulations, known as 49 CFR generally. Although beware, you know, don't go ahead and buy 49 CFR, because the bits you want are actually parts 171 to 180, I think, which is where the HMR is found. Now, PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, would normally be looking to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking sometime around October, November, in order to give industry the chance to comment on the changes that it's proposing to make to the regulations in order to maintain international modal harmonisation. That ain't going to happen. Under the current Trump administration, there's a lot of oversight. The administration doesn't like industry being regulated, despite the fact that obviously a regulation like this will help industry in the US do international business. The last biennial update in the USA was only finalised in May of this year, so that's almost 18 months late. That should have appeared at the beginning of 2019. And what I understand from the authorities in the States is that they will probably have to do what they did before, which was to use what they call enforcement discretion, so that they're not going to penalise operators in the States who are using the updated international regulations. So keep an eye out for that, but don't hold your breath, it won't be here anytime soon. You may ask me, what about the rest of the world? You know, there are other land transport regulations there too. But frankly, why do you want to know? If you're in Europe, say, and you're shipping product to Latin America, for instance, you're going to ship it by IMDG if it goes by sea, or IATA if it's going by air. And you'll let your local partner at the other end work out the land transport arrangements. I'm aware, of course, that we do have viewers from the States. So, you know, Canada, obviously, it's the transporter, road and rail transport between the two countries. Transport Canada is usually pretty good at this. I haven't seen anything yet, but I would expect to see some rulemaking from Ottawa coming out fairly soon. Australia is usually pretty good as well, although the problem there is that while the Australian Dangerous Goods Code will be updated in Canberra, it's left up to the states and territories then to apply it into their law. China, it's possible that you might need to know about China, frankly, because there is, you know, an opening up of the land route heading into China from the west, both by road and rail. I remember several years ago, many years ago actually, I was chairing a conference in Singapore, I think it was, and there was a speaker from the Chinese Ministry of Transport explaining the way that China regulated the movement of dangerous goods. Because being a representative of the government, he was doing it in Mandarin. I don't think he spoke much English anyway, and there was an interpreter. And he explained at the time that there were 8 ministries involved in drawing up those regulations. I said to him through the interpreter, that sounds like a recipe for chaos. The interpreter told me afterwards, he said, when you said that, I asked him to tell us more about the 8 ministries. Fortunately, in recent years, China has simplified the situation a lot. It's now more or less under the direct control of the Ministry of Transport. And it has come into line using really ADR as a basis largely for its road transport. I did notice today that the ministry has put out a consultation document to change the rail regulations governing dangerous goods transport, with the idea, I think, of aligning with the overriding legislation in China and also current practice. The good thing about ADR, of course, is that it tends to be used quite widely by countries that aren't signatories to it. So in the Middle East and Southeast Asia and so on, ADR is a template, if not the actual national legislation. Latin America is an interesting one. I saw a very good presentation from Diego Gatelli from Argentina last week, explaining that, in fact, the main trading blocs, Mercosur and the Andean community, and the other one, I can't remember, facing the Caribbean, are working together now. Because while they tend to use either the UN model regulations or ADR as the basis for their regulations, they're all using different versions. So, you know, at each border point, you're going to have to, the driver will have to get out and change the placards, for instance. So it seems that the aim is to all align with one set of regulations, and a draft has been prepared, which is based on the UN model regulations with aspects of ADR and RID. And they're working at the moment on the 17th revised edition of the UN. So they're still a bit behind. And he said that they would be planning to update every 4 years. It would be impractical to do it every 2 years, he said. So that hopefully in due course will lead to consistent regulation from Mexico all the way down to Tierra del Fuego. But again, so what's new? What are the big themes this this biennial update? Well, nothing amazing really. There aren't any big overarching changes like we've had before. And as I say, it was very much affected by the lockdown. For instance, the WP15, which looks after ADR, was due to meet in May, I think, to finalise the agreement of a lot of the issues it had been working on, and to address those that have been held over from the previous session because there hadn't been time. It didn't take place, of course, because of the lockdown. So a lot was left unadopted. A few things were subsequently added through correspondence that were necessary for modal harmonisation or were really safety critical. And so it wasn't as big an update as it would have been. But nevertheless, you know, the devil, as ever, is in the details. So what are the headlines? Well, there's only 4 new entries through. Those are electronic detonators, and maybe most of you won't even come across them. There's also this new entry for medical waste category A. This was put in place after the response to the Ebola outbreaks in Africa a few years ago, when it was noticed that there was huge volumes of solid medical waste being generated and couldn't really be transported in compliance with the regulations. For those of you involved in radioactives, and I know they may well be, there are a lot of changes for Class 7, none of which I intend to go into because that's really not my strong point. Some revised definitions for self-accelerating decomposition and self-accelerating polymerization temperatures. There's an interesting one in ADR and RID for the definition of tank container operator. This was something that industry brought to the regulators, because in the old definition, it was the person, the organisation that owned the tank container. Well, you know, there's a lot of tank lessors who actually own the containers, but they play no part in operating them, and so that was changed. Our idea is putting a similar change for tank wagon operators. This is an interesting one, and before you start complaining about it, this was done to help you. 3082 and 3077 used to require the technical name, but some of those were just so long and difficult to understand, especially for emergency response personnel. But now in ADR and RID 312814 allows the technical name to be a name shown in capital letters. I've highlighted that because that's important. You can't just put anything there. It's got to be another element of proper shipping name. Provided that this name does not include NOS and that Special Provision 274 isn't assigned. So as I say, this is there to help you. You may have to change the way you're doing things at the moment in order to accommodate it. The other thing is in the IMDG code, certainly the draft I've seen, that provision is actually in Special Provision 274. And in the IATA book, it's in Special Provision A215. What that means about the consignment note, I don't know, but there you go. Data loggers. This is a fancy name for telematics units and stuff like that. Things that are fixed to a transport asset that may be powered by lithium batteries or something like that. It probably did need clarifying because it wasn't clear whether these fall under the regulations or not. And so there's a new section 554 in ADR RID and the IMDG. It's somewhere else in IATA, I think. Dangerous goods containing equipment or in use or intended for use during carriage, attached to or placed in packages, packed containers or low compartments. There you go. ICAO felt it necessary to put a limit on the size of the battery, which may cause potential disharmony. And Dave Brennan from IATA said that there was a possibility that they would be looking at this. The other thing is, what about non-dangerous goods shipments? Containers of fruit with temperature control may have a data logger on them. Does that mean that fruit shippers and carriers are now subject to IMDG or ADR? Well, no, but I don't know how they're going to find it. On the other hand, this new section 5.5.4 is in there near the, I think it's 5.5.3 on asphyxiants and conditioning gases and so on, which the idea being that those could be taken out easily from the IMDG code by people who needed them. There you go. We shall see. Dry ice. This was I'm not entirely sure what was going on here. It's in 553, which in ADR and RID deals with packages containing dry ice as a consignment there, as well as those used for cooling and conditioning purposes. IMDG code doesn't, not in the draft I saw, have the same stuff. Again, here's a couple of other things for that are, you might have a look. This one, again, has come from industry requests that packagings that conform to more than one tested packaging design type can now be marked as such. There we go. And that one on materials for aluminium drums and drums other than steel or aluminium to have internal protective coatings. Seems sensible. Don't know why it wasn't there before. Everything I've said so far, or a lot of it anyway, derives from the changes that were in the 21st revised edition of the UN Model Regulations, the Orange Book. Now, the UN experts are due to convene again at the end of November and into December to agree and adopt the 22nd revised edition. Again, the UN Transport Dangerous Goods Subcommittee postponed it it says politely, its June-July meeting this year because of the COVID pandemic. That was the third of 4 meetings scheduled for the current biennium. And those of you who follow this sort of stuff closely will know that it's the third meeting that often does a whole lot of work and sorts out areas where there have been disagreement. So that didn't happen. I understand from Dwayne Fund, who also gave a good webinar presentation last week, who's chair of that subcommittee, that it will be looking to complete its work during the November-December session. That session is not certain to go ahead in person. I very much doubt it, frankly. And they are working with the UN Secretariat to see how they can meet virtually while fulfilling the requirements of the way that the UN legal system works, that there has to be live interpretation, translation, to allow all delegates to be able to have the same level of input. So again, we shall see. I would hope that at least something can be done. There was talk of, well, why don't we skip a biennium and just carry on and not have a biennial update this time. But there's a lot of stuff that the UN experts have been working on that we really need to get sorted out, I think. And some of those Dwayne was talking about. I hate to mention the word, but lithium batteries again. What they are trying to do is to find a way of not having to constantly redraw the lithium battery regulations. And the idea behind it is to work out some sort of hazard-based classification so that, you know, different sorts of batteries will fall into different hazard classes, which will be determined by testing. At the moment, there is still comparative testing going on at a number of labs around the world, which are trying to settle on the right sort of tests. Again, this has been held up by the pandemic, so I can't see that being finalised in time for agreement in December. More likely, the telephone number on the lithium battery mark, I think it became clear to a lot of people that nobody knew what on earth there was a phone number on the lithium battery mark for. So not only is the lithium battery mark a new shape, new minimum shape and size from next year, very soon you won't even have to have the phone number on. Other things that they're looking at are portable tanks manufactured from fibre reinforced plastic, something that is allowed in ADR and has been taken up by a number of tank container operators in Europe. But I think there's a willingness on the part of the UN to take that into the UN model regulations. Again, I don't expect that to be finalised in time for the 22nd edition. Possibly there might be something on the use of recycled plastic in a wider range of packagings for dangerous goods. Why not? It ticks all the boxes in terms of sustainability and whatnot. And quite possibly also something on sodium-ion batteries, maybe even to the point of saying they're not regulated. But again, we shall see over the next few months. It's going to be quite interesting. I think there's a lot more to come. And so those subject to all these regulations, again, you're going to have to keep your eyes and ears open. HCB will, of course, be doing its best to keep you informed, and I'm sure Labour Line will have books and supporting documentation available for sale. So with that, Richard, any questions, or is everybody going to sleep?
No, it's still plenty of people here. Yeah, I do have a question from Ugo Spriglio, who has asked, will there be some alignment between the different regulations? Now, you've touched on the potential for disharmony, and there is some out there already. And you also mentioned UN 1845. So it's got for example, a shipment moving by air from the US to the UK and is then forwarded onto Ireland in a vehicle. Dry ice by air just needs 1845 on the AWB and box, but for ocean ADR, it needs the words as coolant. This causes an issue for multimodal shippers. So as long as the regulations are not aligned, does any particular regulation prevail?
The regulation that prevails, presumably, is the one that governs the mode you're shipping by. Obviously, if you receive something in the UK by air, it can continue to its first destination without changes. But if then you're going to reship it onto Ireland or indeed anywhere else in the UK, then you've got to put it under ADR, I'm afraid. And I don't see that changing. No.
Yeah, okay, no, it's just an awkward and tricky one, you know, where you normally have the hierarchy of air, sea, road. In a situation like that, that obviously wouldn't necessarily apply. I've got another question from Roy Bonham. He says, for me, the draft provision for the multimodal transport of portable tanks made of reinforced plastic materials are grossly inadequate with respect to the fire tests required on the material. For transport by sea, there ought to be, say, at least 48 hours fire resistance, including flow capacity through the pressure relief devices. He's just asked, does anyone agree with me?
Well, I think there are two things there. Firstly, I don't know if Roy has, but I haven't seen any major incidents involving FRP tanks in road transport. Having said that, and looking at the risks involved in sea transport, I think IMDG would be, or the IMO rather, would be very wary of just adopting things as they stand. I think there's a whole other conversation to be had about firefighting capabilities aboard container ships, particularly large container ships. But that's a different story than one maybe for our friends at Exis Technologies or National Cargo Bureau or TT Club to have. But yeah, I think I'm with Roy really that it possibly isn't such a good idea.
Okay, no, that's all the questions, Peter. So I guess that thank you and Oral, lovely. Thank you. Well, let's hope we have we're back on the road. But that wraps up the world's first biennial dangerous goods web show. So on behalf of Labour Line's Managing Director Keith Kingham, the Labour Line team, and of course me, Richard Shreve, I'd like to thank all the speakers and the sponsors for supporting the event across the 3 webinars. We've had speakers from Florida, Geneva, Netherlands, Denver, and all across the UK, including, of course, Rye and Kent over there. And I'd also like to thank Jocelyn for her efforts with the IT. I think it went relatively smoothly, considering it's our, well, I think it went very smoothly considering it's our first dash at this. And for Dave King, our friend Dave King, for his support as well. Thanks, of course, to all of you who were watching. We had nearly 850 registrations, so that's far more than we thought we were going to get. And it just leaves me to say that the IATA dangerous goods regulations will be dispatched as of next week. So thanks for mentioning that, Peter, as a reminder. We're taking orders for the ADR spirals, and we're offering free shipping around the world for, and we have a number of special offers on our website. So that's a little pump for Labour Line. We've been trying to let others do the commercial bit during the course of this event. But I'd just like to say goodbye to everybody. Thank you very much for attending. Stay safe and hope to see you again sometime soon.